A very warm welcome and good evening to the India Economic Forum under the aegis of the 79th SKOCH Summit. We discuss Shrayana Bhattacharya's magnum opus, Desperately Seeking Shahrukh, today. Desperately Seeking Shahrukh is a socio-economic dipstick of women in the Indian economy. It uses a shared love for India's most beloved actor as a proxy for the economic freedom, financial independence, and aspirations of upward social mobility of women in India. Across the divides of caste, class, and language, united by a shared idea of love, intimacy, and romance, are the women that Shrayana interviews. The author writes on page 384 of a book more educated than any generation of women before them, the deeper issue of men's freedom for self-reliance. A small swathe of young women find it worthwhile to struggle and go solo. They are no longer interested in deriving well-being exclusively through marriage and a man's wages, are unwilling to sacrifice an independent life at the altar of love and social norms. While their male friends and lovers idolized politicians and cricketers, the women I observed idolized their own independence. Ahead for women who desire autonomy and achievement, hope that our extraordinary love for public icons proves worthy of our ordinary private. She ends the book with a rather appropriate quote, supposedly by Sir Bertrand Russell. The mark of a civilized man is the capacity to read a column and weep, focus towards India's labor force. It gives me great pleasure. Our distinguished panel of experts discussing this remark through the prism of an economy today. Ms. Devaki Jain, author and economist, Honorary Fellow, St. Anne's College, Oxford, is the founder and former director of the Institute of Social Studies Trust, New Delhi, India. She was previously a lecturer at the University of Delhi, a founding member of Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era, a member of the South Commission, and of the UN Eminent Persons Group concerned with child soldiers. He holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Westville, South Africa, and has held fellowships at Harvard and Sussex. She has also been a member of state planning boards in the Government of India's special committees related to gender and its inclusion. She has written several books related to the role of women in national and international progress. Her most recent works are 2 volumes of her selected works called Journey of a Southern Feminist and Close Encounters of Another Kind, Women and Development Economics. She has been awarded the Padma Bhushan by the Government of India in 2006 for her contribution to social justice and the empowerment of women. Shrayana Bhattacharya, author and economist. Shrayana is the author of Desperately Seeking Shahrukh and a senior economist at the World Bank's Social Protection and Jobs Practice for South Asia. She leads the bank's development policy dialogue and projects with state and central governments in India on social protection measures and cash transfers. Having previously worked with Seva Union, CPR, and ILO, she has completed her post-graduation in development economics at Delhi University and Harvard. Her debut book, Desperately Seeking Shahrukh, was published in November 2021. Professor Rosa Abraham, Associate Professor, Azim Premji University, is Assistant Professor at the Center for Sustainable Employment. Her doctoral research focused on forms of informal labor in India, examining the rise of informalization in the formal organized sector and the consequent impacts on productivity and inequality. She is an author and contributor to the annual State of Working India reports published by CSE. Her interests include labor and development economics, particularly issues relating to women's work, measurement of work, and the changing nature of informal work. She is a nominated member of the Kerala State Planning Board Working Group on Women and Employment. Varsha Adusimili, author and founder of Wonder Girls. In addition to being a disruptive tech startup enthusiast who set up a multi-million-dollar fund at Kalari Capital with prior experience in digital media, she is also author of the book Wonder Girls, published by Delhi-based Juggernaut Books. Varsha started Wonder Girls, a nationwide initiative which aims to produce and introduce relatable female role models to adolescents in safe environments. The group's flagship fellowship program is the first of its kind platform in India that nurtures and develops adolescent girls into confident leaders from tomorrow. Professor Tarun Jain from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, His research focuses on understanding causes and consequences of human capital formation, especially in the context of fast-growing developing countries. Gender is a topic of special research interest given that women face persistent barriers in economic advancement. His research has received funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the International Growth Center, and the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. In addition to having published work in several peer-reviewed journals, Professor Jain's work also appears in popular print and online platforms. Ms. Yamini Iyer, President and CEO, Center for Policy Research. Her research interests are in the field of social policy and development. In 2008, Yamini ji founded the Accountability Initiative at CPR. Under her leadership, the Accountability Initiative has produced significant research in the areas of governance, state capacity, and social policy. It pioneered a new approach to tracking public expenditures for social policy programs and is widely recognized for running the country's largest expenditure tracking survey in elementary education. Dr. Dipali Pan Joshi, Distinguished Fellow, Scotch Development Foundation and former Executive Director, Reserve Bank of India. Dr. Dipali Pan Joshi is a development economist who served at the RBI for 36 years. She was closely associated with policy formulation in the area of rural credit. She was elevated as executive director in 2013 and held charge of the rural credit, consumer protection, RTI, legal and currency portfolios. She is passionate about the need for strengthening grassroots level interventions and issues of equity and gender. She was also the RBI's nominee on the G20 Committee on Financial Inclusions and has 6 books on poverty and sustainable development and financial inclusion to her credit. Our moderator for today's panel is none other than Alia Waziri, an independent consultant at UN Women. Alia is a lawyer at the Delhi High Court and currently works as an international consultant for UN Women for Timor-Leste. Prior to this, she worked for over a year with the UN Women India Country Office as national consultant on normative frameworks, intergovernmental processes, and women, peace, and security, and also as a legal researcher for Honorable Mr. Justice Yogesh Khanna at the High Court of Delhi. Alia serves as consulting editor for Grain Media, where she oversees an entire section of news on gender and policy. She often writes on the intersection of law and gender, with an emphasis on gender justice and sustainable development goals. Before I declare the panel open and hand the mic over to Alia, may I please invite Mr. Sameer Kochar, Chairman Scotch Group, to say a few words.
Thank you, Rohan, and namaskar to you all. I am so happy to see Devki ji and all of you on this panel. Devki ji, as I know, and her late husband, Shri L.C. Jain, such eminent Gandhians. So I thought I'll start today by remembering Gandhi ji. Gandhi ji used to say, whenever you are in a dilemma while taking a decision, you must think how the decision is going to impact, the poor person sitting last in the row. In 57 years of my life experience, I find that that last person is always a woman. What I have also seen of that last woman in the row is a very strong survival instinct, ability to fight against odds and become someone who can empower rather than needing to be empowered all the time. To share experiences from my own life, my mother was blind and my father was mostly unemployed. But it was the grit and determination of my mother that I could, really get an education. So whether she had to sell her jewelry to do that, whether she had to form self-help groups, mutual lending societies, these women getting together, putting committees and making some money on it. That is how, my childhood and my education was paid for. It was a tough life. Therefore, I always felt that my mother was more competent and financially savvy than my father. Although she was literally at the end of the row with no ability to see, she was blind, as I said, no help and no money. Even from that last seat in the row, she dreamed of me buying a car, buying a house, making a lot of money, just the standard dream that any mother would have. And it is these dreams that she had that have made me what I am today. She was also the first feminist in my life. I was petrified of my father, but she could actually stand up to him, speak her mind, find strength and support in other women, in other similar families around us. We used to stay in Parkganj. Everybody was equally poor. Everybody had the same story. And the women used to stick together to help each other. Similarly, when I got kicked out of my job in 1997 from PCL for raising the question of ethics in business, I was on the road, and but for the support of my wife, Manisha, she carried the burden, the double burden, so to say, of earning for both of us, looking after my two invalid parents, and also young Rohan, who was just a toddler then. But for this support and this contribution, I think so today, whatever I am today, whatever Scotch group is far more belongs to her than any sense of ownership that I can profess. But for that support, I would have not been anywhere. So to me, feminism is a tool for development, for making women equal, if not higher participants in India's growth story. And I have always admired the constructive role played by Devki ji in such a distinguished and dignified life over so many years. And today we see Yamini, becoming an icon, and Sharnya's book that has come highly recommended by both Devki ji and Yamini ji. I am really looking forward to this discussion to be able to take back recommendations to the government on how women can open Indian economy better, and what is it that the government needs to do to make that happen. With that, I hand over to Alia. Alia, over to you.
Thank you, Samir ji, for your kind words. Now, without much ado, I think Shrayana, I'll come to you for opening comments, and I just want to set the tone right. I want to dive straight into it. And I want to talk about why Shah Rukh Khan. Often you have said that while women are divided by class, they're united in fandom. And it is the women in the book, you're not just interviewing women, you're not just interviewing fans of Shah Rukh Khan, but you are interviewing you're interviewing women who are fans of their own economic independence. So the first question that I had as a reader, that our viewers will have: why Shah Rukh Khan? What purpose does he serve? What symbol does he represent? Over to you, Shrayana.
Thanks, Alia. Why Shah Rukh Khan? It's because when I was sent with very traditional survey tools to slums in Ahmedabad to do surveys on women working in incense stick industries, they were making incense sticks at home, earning about a quarter of minimum wage. This was 2006. I was actually working for the Institute of Social Studies Trust. And when I was sent out with my standard survey questionnaire and I started asking all these women the typical questions about wages, working conditions, these were women who were actively unionizing. I think, as Samir ji just said, these were women who were truly contending with their own economic realities. They really didn't need an outsider per se to come in and ask them these questions. They in fact looked at me quite puzzled. And so to break the ice and to just ease into conversation, we would start talking about just things that we had in common. And at that time, this actor emerged because, he's a favorite of mine. He happened to be a favorite of several women I met. And I noticed that the moment we started talking about him, and as you know, the book is, in fact, this is not a book about women chasing a celebrity or worshipping a celebrity. In fact, it's not that at all. It's a book about women wanting to have their own independence, to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, so they can declare that if they want to watch a celebrity or if they want to chase a celebrity, they should be able to do it. They should have the money to do so. They should have access to markets to do so. They should have access to media to do so. So I think, as Rohan said, he's a metaphor and a proxy. And one of the things I realized when we started talking about Mr. Khan, because of just the nature of his icon, immediately the tone, the texture of the conversations with these women just completely opened up. It was just and so I say in the book, and I've been saying of late, that actually he is my research method in this book. The book is about women's journeys, both personal and economic, over a period of 15 years and more. But he essentially helps tell these stories in a much more nuanced way because I think he created this space. He also offered language because women would use him as a way to critique the men in their real lives, norms in their real lives, suddenly using his films and songs. And I think for those who read the book or who will read the book, they'll get a better sense of it. Using his films, songs, idioms to actually talk about their own hopes, frustrations, aspirations, and dreams. And so I think that's why is Shah Rukh. But I think the book is very much a story of fandom as an economic activity. And then that led me into this very long sets of conversations, because I essentially started following up on these women's lives for more than a decade, to understand how their economic journeys unraveled, how their personal lives unraveled. And one of the things you notice in the book, and this shouldn't surprise any feminist, it's that the personal and the economic are so closely interconnected. They're just so heavily interlaced. And I know we'll talk about that as we move forward. And I think what you realize when you sort of take a step back about why Mr. Khan also is that when I listen to all the conversations, I think he also provides a model of a very kinder, a more progressive masculinity. And what's interesting is, we should recognize that that happens irrespective of the fact that he's played stalkers and fairly like harmful, toxic roles in certain parts of his filmography. And yet you would have noticed that actually so many of the women across class groups, caste groups, it didn't matter whether I was speaking to them from, they would keep drawing on the more helpful images from his films. So they would actively say, I didn't like him in films where he was harming women, but I really appreciate the way he speaks to women. And then when I measure, unsurprisingly, I find that women speak much more in his films as well. And so while I think it's Shahrukh because of just an initial set of icebreakers or almost a deviation from the standard research method of trying to understand people's lives, so that's why it's Shahrukh. But Shahrukh also because I think he starts to model a very different kind of masculinity for the women in the book, which is very different, and it departs from the sort of real life, very aggressive masculine that they are dealing with in their personal lives and their workplaces as well. But the book is certainly not, when I say these women are desperately seeking Shahrukh, they are not seeking him as a celebrity. They are seeking their own economic freedom, romantic freedom, and personal freedom. And the book tries to foreground the stories with the data over the past 30 years to just give the reader a flavor of what has post-liberalization India felt like for women. And I'll close with one important thing I feel is that, he is also post-liberalization India's first big superstar, right? And he very much is the icon that there are others who've written about this as well, that he's almost like the bearer of market reform because he became so huge because telecom deregulated. Suddenly there were new channels, media content suddenly amplified at that time following the 1990s reform period. And you suddenly had all these satellite televisions reeling this man's icon, be it his interviews, his songs, his movies. Purchasing power increased in certain areas as well. There was more mobility, at least a steady increase in urbanization as well. And I think as a consequence, he is someone who represents that. But then we should remember he's a man who represents that. And I think it's interesting because if you look at the data in the book, it shows you that of the 10 fastest growing sectors in India post-liberalization, only 19% of those jobs in those 10 fastest sectors have been for women. Majority of the employment gains of that growth period we know have gone to men. And he is a man who has gained from that period of liberalization. And yet these women look up to him. And I think towards the end of the book, I talk about how there is an intergenerational shift because there are mother-daughter duos in the book as well. And you'll see that, in fact, while the mother wants to marry someone like Shahrukh, the daughter wants to be him. She wants all his economic trappings, all the success that he represents, his independence, mobility. So I think initially it was Shahrukh because of this, complete break in research methods. But as I take a step back and I listen to all the conversations, I think it's because he represents markets, he represents a boom in media, he represents a boom in aspirations, certainly for a lot of women, and he represents a very different kind of masculine because I think women are expecting a very different kind of man, and he starts to just play and speak to those expectations.
Right. So for our viewers who have not read this book right now, this is a very simple, humble explanation, but we have to understand this literature as an intimate, up-close, personal portrait of the average Indian woman, again, like she said, post-liberalization, depicted through the prism of the pandemic. And sort of building on what she said, this book is not about love in the colloquial sense. We're talking about love for economic independence. Now, my next question is for Devki ji. Devki ji, we bonded over Shahrukh Khan a few days ago, and we came to the conclusion that Shahrukh Khan symbolizes a binding force, a common factor, and as Shrayana was saying, an icebreaker in conversations. Now, in a country where we are so divided by religion, caste, income, language, gender, the love for this icon has created a space for women to connect with each other. So I come to you, Devki ji, to sort of explain your views on how Shahrukh Khan represents social mobility, social capital. Devki ji, आपका mic mute है.
I've muted I had muted myself. I've opened it now. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not very skilled with these tools, but I'm learning. So I must first start by that because I can answer your question, but I think I would like to put what is called praise Shrayana for being so brave as to put Shahrukh on her title and yet have a solid thesis on women's employment. So that's a bit of a tricky thing, I think. She was attracting people with the title, but the inside is hardcore analysis of what's happening. But rather than all those facts which you're asking me about employment, I want to draw attention to the last two chapters where we have these women who want to have a man, but who are professional, and the dilemma that women in professions are facing in finding a partner and settling down with a man at all. I loved it. I loved those last chapters so much because they really explain the paritapam, the struggle of professional women who reached beyond the usual age of marriage, 19 to 21, that broadly happens in Orthodox India. So I think those conversations, and also the fact that the men are so mean and crude that they drop the woman after taking her out 3 or 4 times. I love that. I think those profiles reflect much more on what's happening in all the economies where women are getting into jobs, but thereby losing the age of marriage, especially in traditional societies. So I wanted to emphasize that rather than. And the second thing is I asked Shrayana, why do you take Shahrukh? But then she explained to me something which I found fascinating, and I'm putting all that on the table without necessarily answering your question. And that is that women who watch television in the afternoons, housewives, after finishing the work and dishwashing, I know it's very common. I've seen it happen in my own husband's relatives' families. At 2 or 3 o'clock, the housewife sits in front of the television and watches serials. So she was saying that they watch Shahrukh because it gives them some excitement that there's this chap dancing around. He's lively. He talks very affectionately to women. And I think that image is also to be brought out in the book. I think we should think of that also. Middle class women and why they enjoy Shahrukh, because that's the television. I'm not going to bother at all about the statistics on declining employment, increasing employment that others can do. That's quite boring these days because we are all into it. But I think the real thing is what's happening to professional women who go on dates in the evening and then find that the man is married or is going to junk them, and then they sit and stay in the flat together. I think those profiles reveal something about what's happening, not only in Indian society, in many of the traditional societies, where when women break the usual barrier of 21, 22 years to find a man. And that area is something which we should really explore a little more. Because what is the comfort zone for those women? Just each other. And how do we enable those women to find a space in Indian society, which is legitimate, which is loved, which is not teased as, oh, she's out there in the market, she's looking for somebody. So, and then this idea that women come together. I like all that. And I think I would like to take that from this book rather than concentrate. And the second thing is the declining female work participation. There's a lot on that. I think that is also something we should attend to much more. So I want to thank you, Shrayana. What you've done is you've given a sexy title to a very serious analysis of what's happening in Indian society and in the Indian economy. But the title is so sexy that people don't realize that inside there is hardcore economics and also sympathy in the last sections for people like you who are professionals but not married yet. So that's a very important thing.
Alia, can I just come in, just reacting to something Devkiji said? Firstly, it's such a pleasure, Devkiji, that you're here. And thank you for being so kind to the book. So it's wonderful to see you. I wanted to say a couple of things, in fact, just picking up on what she said. In the book, and it's actually a framework I use quite significantly. I think those of us who are economists will have heard of it. This is work from economist Sendil Mullainathan, who actually just wrote a paper once, and he had this phrase, he called it a hidden tax. And this idea is that, when he was writing about it, what he was trying to say was, as women start to become professional, as Devkiji was saying, and I think he was very much thinking of the US. So, here it would be the elite, the upper middle class, that sort of group. Women, as they start to move forward in their professional ambitions, are actuating their career goals. Suddenly, there are all these emotional taxes that families, loved ones, lovers, boyfriends, communities start to pose on these women. And, these are called hidden taxes. And I think one thing, Alia, was really, actually, I get quite emotional about it as I think about it, because if you look at all the stories in the book, irrespective of which class group these women belong to, there is such a heavy tax that they are paying just to want to be themselves. In a way, it's almost like, in fact, none of the women in the book are particularly, you wouldn't sort of call them revolutionaries on the surface, considering what that means. But if you start to really pay attention to their lives, which I was fortunate enough to do, you start to realize that they're actually negotiating through some very complex equilibriums, these taxes. And some, lose patience and are exhausted in the meantime. Some actually are able to sort of surmount these challenges. But that's a very important story in the economy. I really felt with this book, what I was trying to do was that, often when we talk about the women's labor crisis and the female employment crisis, I think there's a technical way we talk about it. But love, loneliness, and there's an emotional life that crisis has. There's a huge psychological there's a psychological impact of these dry statistics, and these dry statistics also hold a lot of emotion. And I really wanted, I think, the reader to get a much more textured sense of what the economy really feels like. And I think, to me, I'll keep using that word feel again and again, because I feel like if you're not able to convey that emotion and the granularity of that crisis, I don't think the solutions then also can be as astute or as sound as we would like. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, may I just ask her one more question? I know I'm taking too much time. Just one.
Please.
I was puzzled why you stayed with that class. The statistics in your book and the earlier part are about all of us.
That's true. Yeah.
And laborers, migrant workers. And then that last section, which is more on individuals or profiling, why you didn't spend more time looking at these women who are living on the margins of Delhi, unmarried, sometimes married, and that, to bring the public attention to those women. It happened during, if you remember, when we had this CAA sit-ins and so on against those oppressive laws.
Yeah.
How much of that came out about the outskirts of Delhi, all by young feminists like you? I think there's a whole case there for bringing attention to them.
I fully agree with you.
Attention you bring to people like myself who are on a hook till we found a man. That's not as those people are more interesting.
Yeah.
And so I thought maybe the second book could go more into class.
Yeah, no, the book is structured around classes, the different sections map onto different class groups. But I fully agree with you. I feel like if anything that I do next, it will be notions around solidarity in sort of some of these more marginalized communities. But the book, as you know, has home-based garment workers, migrant domestic workers. It's sort of different milieu. But yeah, I fully agree. And there is, thoughts of what is to be done next that are germinating in my mind. So thank you. Back to you, Alia.
Thank you.
Right. So Shrayana spoke about hidden taxes. I had a full-fledged question on this, and I'll go to you, Rosa. I'll come to you, Rosa. Now, for those of us who are non-economists like me, would you please delineate, I just identified a broad scales. What does the term hidden taxes mean, building on what Shrayana said? And what are the psychological, emotional costs that women end up paying due to the gender crisis? Would you also link it to the double burden phenomena, the unpaid care work, and how this fuels the inability of women to enter, exist, and re-enter the workplace? Over to you, Rosa.
Thanks, Alia, and thanks for inviting me onto the panel. I think it's really great to be talking about a book which I think is going to be my favorite of the year, and it's only February, sorry. So yeah, on the question of hidden tax, I think, so the subtitle, Women's Search for Intimacy and Independence, really captures really what I think the book for me was about, which is this: for women, intimacy seems to be in conflict for independence. The more they sought out one, the more they had to forego the other. And so I think Shrayana makes this says this in a book where men must earn money and women must earn love. But these two can't go hand in hand, where men earn money and love, women earn money and love. That doesn't happen. For somehow we've structured our systems to work that these are often in conflict with each other. And how these hidden tax play out is in these conflicts between intimacy and independence. So as women in their search for independence and autonomy are more and more educated, are venturing into the labor market, are seeking independence, seeking their own source of income, that often conflicts with men's own desires for power and for control and norms that they've been used to. And so what are women's competencies in the labor market now becomes, as Shrayana says, disabilities in her dating, in the dating market or in the marriage market. I think a lot of us, I'm sure most of us have, as women would have been told, don't study too much, you might damage your chances in the marriage market. And so I think these are some kinds of taxes that women as professional or like women who enter the workforce as salaried workers may face. But then you also have this hidden tax, and again in the conflicts that they face with men. And I think for me, one thing that the book really highlighted, of course, it throws light on women, but I also wanted to talk about what is the light that it throws on men, which is men's own discomfort with women working, with women's expressions of independence, men's discomfort with women's autonomy. So there was this one particular scene in the book, which Shrayana talks about, where one of the workers, she was playing music on a mobile phone that she had acquired through her work and just enjoying the music. And at some point, her husband felt almost threatened by the level of, her capacity to enjoy and just let go. And consequently, the mobile phone was destroyed. And so you have this conflict coming into play, because where India has modernized for its men have not modernized for women and for India. And I think that's the hidden tax which comes into play because of the inability of, I know it's a huge burden I'm casting on men, but I think for far too long, the conversation has been about women must go out and work and women must take charge. And you have these statements like lean in and push yourself and be loud, take over the workplace, But where is the men in this? Why are they not told to? Why are they not called out for their patriarchal things? Why are they not calling out colleagues when colleagues are patriarchal? Why are they not standing up for women in the workforce, right? And I think for far too long, this tax of navigating the workforce, navigating the home, navigating the responsibilities of unpaid care have far too long been on women. And it is then up to men also to step into that conversation. And that's where the hidden tax on women really comes into play.
Thanks, Rosa, for that very clear explanation. Yamini ji, I come to you next. My question to you is that while this book is about Shahrukh Khan, it is also not, and I hope Shrayana agrees, but this is my view as a reader, it is also primarily about the staggering gender crisis in our economy. We know that India is in India is now at rank 140 out of 156 countries in the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Report, which makes India the third worst performer in South Asia. Now, when deciphering India's performance on this index, we have to bear in mind that this report is a measure of gender gap on 4 parameters, namely economic participation, opportunity, educational attainment, health, survival, political empowerment. So the question that I want to ask you is that, do there exist, and if yes, multifaceted systemic socio-economic barriers that are waiting to be identified for women to return and just simply exist in the workforce and visibly occupy places of high income jobs? Yamini ji? Ma'am, we can't hear you. I think your mic is on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Sorry. Just wanted to say, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me to this wonderful panel and for giving me the opportunity to speak to Shrayana's book. I've witnessed its unfolding from what I first thought to be a crazy idea into the magnum opus that it is. I have witnessed its evolution from, what was to be initially a set of academic research ideas into a book that cuts across scholarship and a general readership that engages across class, and engages with the dynamic way in which gender is experienced across class, across caste, across location. And it is really quite exciting to see its final product over all of these years. I still think that Shrayana's real contribution to my life has been in all the in the travels we've had across different parts of the country studying Indian bureaucrats. And now that's the book I'm waiting for, because I know she'll talk about state capacity far better than me. But to the issue that you raise, and I think, for me, it's difficult to comment on the book as an independent, as the book itself, because I really have been part and parcel of the process of its evolution, and many conversations that Shrayana and I have had over the years of her book also coincided with my own lived experiences of being a professional in the workplace, to being a mother and a professional in the workplace, to juggling various things and coming to my terms as an individual. After all, the personal is politics, and vice versa, with my own location in the workspace and my own location in how I think about these questions of women's participation in the economy, and what it means actually to create an equal opportunity work environment, admittedly in the somewhat privileged context of the white collar professional worker. But what I found really fascinating about how Shrayana weaved these stories together is that in so many ways she presents precisely these dilemmas as women in different moments and different stages of their work lives, of their economic lives, and their personal lives confront these challenges. And what she leaves you with is not a black and white, this is the right way to address the structural barriers that we all confront. The fact that we confront these structural barriers are well recognized. There's nothing aha or new in that. But that there are silent revolutions that are taking place, which we often undermine and do not recognize, which sitting from the outside may appear to be women in some ways giving in to the very structural barriers that they're seeking to fight, but actually are very, very crucial parts of what is incremental shifts in what is ultimately long-term social transformation. So for me personally, choice matters, and I understand that choice is that choice is structured by context in no small measure. But we often oscillate between lamenting lack of choice and undermining those who make choices about how they negotiate and navigate their personal and their economic lives. And sometimes those choices may not appear to you to be the obvious choice that you would make from whichever location you are placed in at that moment in time. But the sensitivity with which Shrayana presents how different women are making these choices gives you an understanding of sometimes these may not appear to be completely independent. Some of the girls that Shrayana traced over courses of time went back many steps, but they fought to arrive somewhere and then made their own choices about where they wanted to end up. And that, I think, is a really powerful story of what it means to be a woman, what it means to prize open spaces in your personal life and in your economic life, that we miss in the larger context of the macro conversation of what these big numbers tell us. And ultimately, it's in those quiet negotiations, the fact that I'm able to save a few small paisas to go and watch a movie for 2 hours, which is a luxury that many do not have. As a working mother, it's a luxury I do not have most of the time. That itself is a revolutionary moment that needs to be captured, that needs to be documented, that needs to be understood. And I may go back home to the very close space of to a very traditional patriarchal structure where my own spaces of empowerment are constrained, but I'm still fighting to be able to go and see that movie. I'm still fighting to be the fangirl. I'm still fighting to be the girl who wants to enjoy herself, which is very different to what my daily experiences are. And ultimately, I may choose to live a comfortable life in the patriarchal setup, but those fights shape how I then bring up the next generation and how I think about my future, my daughter's future, and the social context in which these relationships get negotiated and navigated. So for me, this book is a subtle reminder that the real battles of feminism are fought in there every day, and we need to constantly document these, understand them, be empathetic towards them, because ultimately that's where change will happen.
Right. Thank you, Yamini-ji. I come to you next, Professor Tarun Jain, and my question to you is about something that both Devki-ji and Yamini-ji spoke about. They spoke about looking for spaces of empowerment, and their empowerment in itself being constrained, limited. To sort of dive into the denser topics, we are looking at a rapid removal of women from paid workforce. And while this, as Shrayana says, that while this is a well-known fact among economists, it still continues to shock. Let's also talk about the inability of women to simply exist in the workforce while simultaneously looking, bargaining, searching, finding ways to acquire economic freedom vis-a-vis tools, methods, mediums such as Shahrukh Khan. And to sort of give you a few statistics, is that we can't have we have a discussion about the female labor force participation and how it's falling rate without talking about how many leaps backward the pandemic has taken us, and to just talk about how the labor force participation for women had hit a record low, which is 15% during just the April to June 2020 quarter. I also want to quickly point out, if you could, in your answer, that the jobless growth of the Indian economy has impacted women more severely than men. And what reason would you attribute for this?
Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me for this very interesting panel. There are lots of people here who I've learned so much from, so it's a real honor for me to be here. I loved Shrayana's book. She came to IIM Ahmedabad to talk about it, and we had a fascinating discussion. But it's not surprising. Not only did I love the book, my students love the book too. And so what I'm seeing these days is that a lot of students will order the book or buy it from a bookstore, and the moment it comes, they'll pose with it on social media, post it, so excited, my book is finally getting to read it, right? Because the library only has so many copies. So, people have, so they're very excited about this book. And I think what's cool is this is a book about social science, right? So this is a book which is packed with the tremendous amount of social science research that has taken place over the last few decades on gender, but other kinds of social differences. Yeah. So, in economics, certainly, economics is a latecomer to this field, where we've started to look at Why is it that gender matters? To what extent is our gender differences a function of discrimination versus other reasons? We're trying to see where all there is discrimination in society, gender differences. And what has happened, and virtually everyone in this panel has contributed to this research, is that we've uncovered so much about gender discrimination, gender barriers all over the place, right? And so all this careful documentation has taken place over the last few years, and this book is really like sort of coming as a summary of this that can be packaged, and now many people can access that, not just people who are attending economic seminars or social science seminars.
Excuse me, Alia. Can I butt in now for a minute? I may have to leave. I'm not able to cope with late evenings. Can I just speak for 2 minutes?
Of course, ma'am. Sorry, Tarun.
I want to thank everyone, and I'm very excited to see Samir. Haven't seen him for months, years. We were very close. He even gave me an award, which is somewhere here, SKOCH Challenger Award. Thank you. I'm happy to see you, Samir. It's very nice to see survivors because we still lived so many decades. So thanks a lot, and thank all of you for inviting me. I don't want to add anything to the debate except to say that I'm very pleased with Shrayana has made it both lively and funny, and also talked about upper middle class women, which is normally talked about, not. So thank you so much for inviting me for this. Please forgive me, I must go. I'm 88, as much as I can.
Great pleasure to see you, ma'am, after the Hyderabad Central Board meeting with Shashi Rajgopalan.
Yes, of
many,
course.
many years ago when we had met. I'm very happy to see you again.
If you live long enough, you've traveled all the territories, cooperatives, trade unions, poor women, rich women, Anglo-Saxon places. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Devaki. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Devaki ji. Tarun, would you like to continue?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, what is cool now is that if social science is not only, documenting a lot of gender discriminations and reasons, but also providing solutions. And what has been happening is, for example, I look back to a classic study that was conducted by Claudia Golden and Cecilia Roos on the Cleveland Orchestra. And the Cleveland Orchestra used to interview its musicians, and they had a fairly small fraction of their musicians who were female. They switched to blind auditions, only focus on the professional aspect, which is important for your job. And guess what happened? Lots of women became, members of the Cleveland Orchestra as a result. So, to me, the lesson over there was, if you're a corporate manager, focus on hiring the employees based on their professional skills and competencies, and you will find that women match up. If you focus on pointless personal things like personality, we all have opinions on that, and you'll see lots of variation. There's another example, right, of a pointless policy, which I see many companies having, which is wage non-disclosure. So companies say, we're not going to tell you, we're not going to announce to everyone how much we pay our employees. So what happens? Women don't know whether to negotiate for a better wage. In organizations where wages are well known, so for example, public organizations, women are quite capable of negotiating equal wages for themselves, provided that they know that there was a possibility of negotiating from a larger budget, right? So this is the sort of solution that I think social scientists are now offering the workplace in order to have more labor force participation, have more labor force, equality in pay. And I think these are quite important to take up. We think about policy measures. We say, you can ban wage discrimination. Good luck in ever enforcing that. But if you can say that, you should focus on those aspects of your employees, selecting employees, which actually matter for the job, and not ask pointless questions which have nothing to do with your ability to do the job, I think that is something which is quite important, right? So, Alia, you also asked about the declining labor force participation rate. Shrayana is a master at that question of answering why is it that the Indian labor force participation is declining for women. She talks about many of those reasons in her book, and many of you should check that out. So, all I'll say is that this is a massive loss, right? So the implications of women not participating in the workforce are quite severe. So if you think about, say young women in the economy today, people who are between 10 and 30 years old, these are some of the largest cohorts of Indian women ever in human history. This is going to be some of the largest cohorts ever in human lifetimes. And insofar that these are also some of the best educated and most capable people ever to be in India, the fact that they don't work, think of all the sort of lost GDP, lost productivity, lost talent that is out there. So I've been conducting some research in Haryana on gender attitudes and how to make sure that women advance. And I always think about how many Kalpana Chawlas have we lost out because women in villages in India never got the opportunities to go out and prove what they could have. And so, we have to think a little bit about some of the implications of the fact that lots of talent is just sitting on the table and not being utilized. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm more than happy to come back to some of these points later.
Right. Thank you. And Shrayana, I'm coming to you now with respect to what Professor Tarun said, but I'm going to sort of circle back to Shahrukh Khan again, because Sameerji had just one request that we keep sprinkling Shahrukh Khan in our conversation. So I am going to talk to you again as a reader, that reading your work reminds me of this Chinese theory of the red thread that links lovers. I'm not saying the women in this question, in this situation are lovers, but simply that there's a red thread that connects people sometime, which may stretch in or tangled in circumstances, but it never gets broken. And more specifically, it is their love, it is the women you interview, their love for Shahrukh Khan that binds them together into what you would call, or what Devki ji said is a very sexy title, a cohesive bunch of India's lonely young women. Now, my question to you is that Shahrukh Khan, earlier you said, represents a promise of post-liberalization India. He's a symbol of social capital, social mobility, but also romantic freedom. He's representing a progressive, gender-responsive man who is open to talk about feelings. But can we talk about men as allies for a minute? Can we talk about the classic mansplainer that you talk about in your book, or the uncles that you joke about in your book? The insecure man who is struggling to deal with a new generation of very vocal, confident women who are just autonomous and their achievements matter to them.
Thanks, Alia. Firstly, it's such a, I can't tell you, it's so surreal when I'm here and I can hear you're quoting bits of the book with such enthusiasm. It's so lovely and heartening. And so thank you for that. Thank you for engaging with it as much as I can sense you have. So thank you. I have two things to say, Alia. I think that this goes back to what Rosa put on the table, I think, when we were having this conversation as well. I think for too long, so the kind of, I just have to be very honest, and as you can see with the book, I'm quite brutal about many of the things I believe, and people can then disagree with them, that's completely fine. I'm really tired of this sort of, this feminism of sassiness. There's a kind of, everyone's so strong and everyone's out there, and there's this like very glamorous idea of like everyone is like an entrepreneur, everyone's a CEO, everyone's a leader, right? I'm tired of that, because I think actually that places even additional burdens on women. Many of the women in my book don't want to be leaders. They don't see themselves as victims. They just want to earn what they are due based on their work. They just want to live the lives that they want to. And I think Yamini talked about this as well, right? They want the choice to sort of just be who they are and feel loved and secure for who they are. And one of the things that I actually find very surprising in India, honestly, based on the stories I've heard, is how something as simple as that, right? Be it watching your favorite actor as a gesture to just love yourself or have a good time for yourself, something for your own simple pleasure, is so incredibly difficult for women. You don't have time, you don't have money, you feel guilty. So many of the women told me, I feel guilty spending some amount of my money on leisure for myself. Whereas men are never sort of, the men's leisure consumption is never, it's not steeped in that social conversation. And so to me, I think, in fact, what I find with these women in the book, and I'm not going to generalize, this is certainly true of the women I followed in the book, is that I don't think it's just that they love Shahrukh that unites them. I think that I actually say this in the book that, as real men recede, icons grow exalted, because I think for these women, they are looking for men in their real lives to support them. And by the way, in the book, there are men who do support some of the women. There are brothers who come in to provide debt support, career help, One of the women in my book, she runs away from her family. The only person she's actually in touch with is her brother. So these family and community institutions are still so critical in a country where the state and the market is not your safety net. The family and the community continues to be your safety net. That is the state of affairs right now. And in that world, I think all these girls are feeling, and women are feeling, very taxed by an extremely transactional conversation around family norms, men telling them that if you behave X way, then you'll be loved. If you have a certain waistline, you'll be loved. If you quit your job and just stay at home, you'll be loved. There's this constant conditionality that's being thrown at them. And I joke in the book that all of us have become game theorists, because in this conversation of love, without even being taught game theory, because what I mean is precisely this: all women in the country know that if you need to earn love or earn the sort of good graces of certain types of people, there are different kinds of behaviors you need to display, right? Be it the way you dress, the way you speak, how you comport yourself, how many hours you are seen spent doing work in the kitchen. Even if you have nannies and maids, it is women who must show that they are running the house, right? And enthusiastically so. There are all these codes. And I think, in fact, the women in my book across class, be it a migrant domestic worker, be it a woman who's like a posh princess living between Chhattisgarh and Jorbagh, what all these women have in common is that they're very tired of being told by a patriarchy that you need to behave in X ways, and only then can you be loved for who you are and your choices. I think generationally, this is a big shift. And I think this speaks to what Yamini was saying. And I really believe through the book, I'm trying to give the reader a flavor of this, which is, I think our mothers perhaps come from a generation where there would have been more acceptance, adjusting. I think there is a new generation, and will probably become stronger as we move forward, where these women are unwilling to adjust. There's a chapter in the book called An Equilibrium of Silly Expectations. And actually, that's what I mean. I think our expectations, because of liberalization, maybe our realities have not been liberated, but our expectations certainly have. And I think all these women are tired of hustling to feel loved just because they love their careers, or they love their jobs, or they just want to, go out and watch a film, being told that those are things which you will not be loved for, you will not be supported for. And I think that's the pull for Mr. Khan, actually, which is that I don't think, he's wonderful, and whatever I wanted to say about him, it's there in the book. And I really have to thank so many film critics, because, I come from a social science background. I know nothing about film, but I really interviewed a bunch of film critics and producers who were so helpful. But I think, to me, that is actually what unites all these women in their love for Shahrukh, which is that I think they feel so tired of this hustling and constantly being asked to conform, that, this man with open arms and all the soppy songs, it looks ridiculous, right, to the rational sensibility. But there's a strong psychological function that's playing, because it's this image that just gives you comfort and it's relief, right? And I think that was a very important story I wanted to tell, which is, images and things that we think are so silly and banal, like a man in Switzerland, romancing a beautiful woman in a chiffon sari. Actually, if you listen to the people watching those images in rooms, like, for example, the migrant domestic worker in my book, Lily, she actually says to me that, I love those. The first time she's ever seen Shahrukh is when she's moved to Jorbagh to work for someone. And in her employer's home, she's seen him on television. And she says, and she's seen this film called Rab Ne Bana Di Jodi, which I highly recommend. Everyone should go watch it. And there's a scene in which he's actually serenading a tiffin. The lead actress in the film has made him, has made food for him, and he's carrying that to the office. And he looks at it as if like the tiffin is his lover. And I remember Lily, and I write about this in the book, she turned to me and she said, well, if a man appreciated women's care labor, or the interest that a woman takes in taking care of her loved ones as much as he does in this film, our lives would be so much better. So I think what really unites all these women is not just sort of the icon of Shahrukh, but I think the fact that they are feeling, so with this enhanced expectation, they are feeling very frustrated in their needs not being met in sort of their real lives by real men, real families. And he is escape and relief to that.
Right. Thanks, Shrayana. So I'm going to quickly go to Dipali ji. And Dipali ji, Shrayana spoke about how cinema, I know, but specifically Shah Rukh Khan serves as a bridge over the troubled, so-called troubled waters in a country like ours, which is as divided and unequal. Now, can we agree, Dipali ji, that gender norms and domestic work are not mutually exclusive? Can we say that gender patterns are evolving with each generation? But however, having said that, gender inequalities, and unpaid care work, unpaid care activities do not exist in isolation. And I'm talking about the fact that social norms, it has often been argued, carry the sole proprietorship on how and if at all women will be able to once again re-enter, exist, enter, sort of subsist and occupy high income paying jobs, exist in a market space. So would you agree, would you say that women's labor force participation will increase or at the very least stabilize if one of the contributing factors to the former's decline, which is women having to struggle so much to simply break barriers, if unpaid care work, domestic work is regularized by, let's say, state funded mechanism?
Yes, of course, I would agree. I would fully agree. And I'd first like to talk about Shrayana's lovely book. I mean, Shrayana's book, which I am absolutely in love with, it's a very clever book because she weaves together, and the blurb says it, the economic and personal trajectories of the jobs, desires, prayers, love affairs, and rivalries of a diverse group of women who are divided by caste and divided by class, but are united by fandom, and therefore Shahrukh. So to the question of why Shahrukh, for me, Shahrukh is a symbol of liberalization because he's the middle class boy who comes in from the margins, leverages his education, leverages his talent, and gets ahead. So that's the first thing which Shahrukh does. And then there's always a need for role models, the sexual sensitive man, which we are all looking for. And maybe it's an image of ourselves which we project onto that man. And the thing is, the SRK is the ideal type in. He's the he plays out fantasies of female autonomy and achievement also. And SRK is a quintessential feminist because who supports freedom and choice for women, as the book puts it. So what do all of us really want? Whether it's you, me, or my domestic, we just want fair treatment and equal opportunities. So therefore, it is very important to address these emerging gaps in economic participation. What Rohini Pandey has been quoted as saying, and I'm actually saying Rohini because she's my niece, that it's very concerning and it should be a policy priority for the state. And having said that, I want to quickly go through a laundry list. Now, Shrayana has said that, we have to peddle. We have to peddle, not just principles, but a laundry list of things which need to be done by the state. And that was the ask for me also in our pre-discussion. So I'd like to first say that modern India is not so modern as women and should strive to be so. That public spaces, women are still not able to occupy, as in you can't go alone and see a film. And she described a very nice encounter between Vidya and a fangirl, maybe herself, because they're all alone in a film. And people with a family want them to adjust. So it's always, why should single women have to not have this autonomy? So that's the first thing, to make public spaces safe for women. Then gender-based employment gaps between men and women should be the policy priority for the state. The state has to see the PLFS survey points out. It's not just rural employment in agriculture, the hit from the pandemic. I mean, it's just women are going nuts because now they have to handle the baby and the house and the maid and the workspace. Women like you, women like me. So that's something the state has to prioritize. Then what should the state do? The recommendation is that material resources and cultural change, more working women's hostels, more scholarships for women to study abroad. or to just to study. I mean, I was so touched by the story of the accountant who's struggling. And she says that, I have no one who's going to help me negotiate these spaces of classes and tuition. I just can't afford it. Of course, separate toilets for girls in all schools, because male literacy is 83%, as the book also tells you, is 65% for women. Why? Because they can't go to school if there are no bathrooms. Then street lights. Why? As electricity, which will allow her, Zahira and the embroidery women, Manju, to work harder and longer hours and get better work. And the sector which I spent my life trying to change, women. Credit for women from banks is still very difficult, despite all that we have tried to do, because women do not have land or assets in their name. So we said you give a loan to a group, and the group stands guarantee for it, but that's a very small amount of loan which they manage to get. So the feminization of credit, which we talk about in all important fora, that, if you give credit to a woman, it goes to the family, is still not happening, because in Shrayana's book, there are these women who are just getting better terms and they're getting better products from the Seva Bank. So a recommendation that you need products for women, and you need flexible interest rates for them. You need improved wages, working condition, hours of work in home-based garment work. Her agarbatti, papad, pickle, per piece wage rate, as she emphasizes, which they find so difficult to negotiate with Aslam. And then they have this whole bonding over Shahrukh Khan and the ability to see films and do so much. And she's already pointed out how the internet and the cable has opened up. Shahrukh, he comes into your drawing room and absolutely holds your hand. So you have to acknowledge home-based work. And this is the question which you asked me. And this is also one of my 8th recommendation, that you have to acknowledge home-based work as a legitimate which discussions around care and mobility to mediate.
Dipali ji, there's a lag in your connection. We can't hear you.
Till this
Alia, probably you could move on to the next speaker and come back to Dipali.
Sure, I'll do that. Forgive me, Dipali ji, if you're watching, we will definitely come back to you. I come to you next, Varsha. My question for just for 1 second, let's talk about the literature of it. Of course, we will talk about the economics of it also and Shahrukh Khan, but I want to talk about how reading Desperately Seeking Shahrukh stands out in a sea of other non-fiction books because of its ability to acknowledge existing literature on similar subject matter and reassure its readers that what they are reading is unique and unprecedented. I mean, here we're talking about an in-depth, documented analysis of how women are struggling to create a space for themselves. And I really like that at one point, if I'm not wrong, there's a reference to Bridget Jones and Fleabag. But having said that, the question that I want to ask you, Varsha, now is that the laundry list of very gender responsive policies that Dipali ji had outlined, they go on to say that our social structures are mirrored in the job market. The way the job market is, how it presents itself is something that happens in isolation. It does not exist in a vacuum. Women are heavily dependent on their marriage and men for lots of things, economic things, revenue, survival, security, and it is this bargaining with families to craft an empowering space during vis-a-vis a complex set of negotiations. This is where a gender responsive policy making comes in. What would you like to say about this? You're on mute, ma'am. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that I'm a crazy Shrayana book fan, right? I read it the week it came out. And since then, the book is the only thing that I've been gifting people. I've been forcing people to read it.
and recently I made a couple buy and read it. So I think I'll soon be banned from all social interactions because this is the only thing that I'm gifting people now. But I also think that, I think in this panel, I'm the only one probably, I could be wrong, with a corporate experience, right? And I do think that all HR leaders who are trying to retain women in the workforce should read the book. I do think that all consumer internet CEOs, right, or people trying to build D2C brands, trying to understand women should read the book. I also think that product designers, people who are building, products for women, right, should read the book, right? There's just a lot of value in kind of going one layer below what all the data, we read, right? I was actually recently talking to this very senior designer at one of the unicorn companies, and I was basically asking her, "Hey, look, where do you see yourself a couple of years from now, right?" And then she said, "I want to become a director at this company." And then she also said, I've been spending lakhs of my own money to kind of upskill myself and get that role, right? And a minute into our conversation, she also says, but I also could potentially drop out next year because, my family has reached a certain level of income and my husband is taking home a certain amount of salary. And now there's a lot of pressure from my in-laws and my parents to just drop out and, take care of my children, right? Now, we don't know whether this woman will go out and become that director that she wants to become or whether she will drop out, right? So I think that's the conflict that Indian women, in their 30s are kind of dealing with on a day-to-day basis, right? And it is stories like this that Shrayana really talks about and highlights in her book, which kind of add a certain level of nuance to this number of why are so few Indian women in the workforce, right? And which is why it really resonated with me, and I also think that if there is no emphasis on the care economy, and if care infrastructure doesn't get built out, and if care at home doesn't become a 50% responsibility, I don't think no amount of leaning in or whatever it is, right, or all the corporate woo-woo, I don't think it'll help women. I don't think it'll help us retain them, right? And the book actually talks about all of this and emphasizes all of this beautifully. There's also just another thing that I want to kind of highlight. We do a lot of work in classrooms and with teenage girls. And one of the things that we do notice at the school level is that you don't have enough female role models in our textbooks, right? You don't have enough female role models in history, in literature, and that actually plays out because boys are not growing up by, looking at women with careers and women with jobs, right? And as a result, they don't have respect for women who work. So I think, if Shrayana and people like her can influence at some level to make female role models as part of curriculum, right? So that boys develop respect for women who actually go to work. I think stuff like that could really make a difference. And lastly, before I kind of hand it back to you, I don't think women should now go on dates with boys who don't read Shrayana's book. I think, Bumble should qualify it, right? We will only match you if you read the book, right? So I'd like to end by saying that, Shrayana, fabulous job. The only thing that I would request you is, how do we figure out, how do we nuggetize your book, right? How do we make this something that people could consume more easily on Instagram? Because in India, it's still not, book reading is still not a thing as much as we would like. So how do we kind of get funding and how do we kind of get, people who can make this more video based and make this more digestible, right? And in short formats, I think that will make a difference. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Varsha. Dipali ji, I'm coming back to you. Would you like to complete that list now, please?
Yeah. I don't know what I was telling you, but yes, I think this should be made into a film, Shrayana. Such a lovely book. What I was basically talking about was that unless the state steps in and prioritizes these things, we are not going to get very far. And we are all aware of these challenges, but it's for the state now to give gender parity and to the wages of men and women and the unpaid work has to be now metered. And the care economy has to step in. These taxes which Sendil Mulyathan has been talking about for a while must go. And The important thing is that we have to feel proud of ourselves and of what we have achieved, and not some, as she says, Delhi men are souls of global order. I think that goes for global men of global order, and we should be.
Right. Thank you, Dipali ji. Professor Tarun Jain, I'm coming to you for a quick question. The fact exists that women are not a homogeneous group.
To have our wealth holdings of land building auctions in our name. And I think divide in creation instead of increasing or reducing. So that is important. And
Right.
I think this is something which we must really look at. And in fact, I would go so far as to say women should receive preferential access in education.
Dipali ma'am, आपकी आवाज कट रही है, so forgive me, I'm going to have to move on right now. I will come back to you. Professor Tarun Jain, my question to you was that while we are, it would be a myopic discussion if we don't include the migrant crisis, especially the pandemic's impact on migrant workers. While we are talking about falling FLFP rates, we have to talk about how migrant workers in particular have faced the double burden of earning a livelihood and unpaid care work, which is also what Dipali ji was saying. What we need is a gender responsive budgetary allocation. What we need is a welfare mechanism, state acting as a welfare state that steps in and ameliorates situations. So I would like you to sort of just identify for our viewers migrant specific characteristics and social norms working against women, which had the debilitating impact. When people say that the pandemic took us years behind in the leaps we had made in terms of women's agency, empowerment, economic freedom, could you just identify these for us on a quick basis?
You're talking about a lot of things, but I think the most important point is that the migrant crisis and COVID's pandemic in general, right, just made a lot of households poorer. And insofar that lots of households become poorer, who bears the burden of that poverty? It's disproportionately female burden, right? And so there's this policy lesson: invest in social nets. And those social nets will help everyone. It will help poor women and help poor men. So, insofar that NREGA allocations have to be larger, insofar that, for example, PDS has to be portable. These are all measures to help migrant workers. It will help poor families. We need to invest far more. And I think I heard Dipali ji talking about this, that, invest more in education, invest more in public education, invest more in public health, right? Including women's health, including health in rural areas. When you do that, you help poor women, you help disempowered women, you help disempowered families in general, right? You help children. So, investing in better schools, investing in better daycare. And so there's the entire Anganwadi system of India, right? And so I can't think of anything would help both children, help women, and help entire families more than investing in high quality preschool. This has been a mantra in the US and everything, and we all applaud it. When we think about our own preschool system, it is the Anganwadi system, it is ICDS, it is school lunch programs. We should invest in those. There's no reason not to. That will help everyone across the board.
Right. Thank you for that very quick analysis. Rosa, I'm coming to you now. We have been talking about unpaid care work, but I'm going to quickly give a few examples of just how deep the disparity has set in. There was a very recent time use data by the National Sample Survey Office, which said that the urban Indian woman spends 293 minutes per day on unpaid care work, as opposed to the male counterpart, which spends 94 minutes. Now, we are challenging the very definition of gender roles by implicating that this will cause a qualitative shift in preserving the institution of patriarchy, which is making it difficult for women to break barriers, something that Yamini ji was saying earlier. Now, how do you view this disparity in how women and men allocate time for unpaid care work? And is this the link between misconceptions about masculinity that Shrayana talks about in her book and achieving equality through a change in cultural norms? Sorry, this is a loaded question. I've been wanting to ask for a while.
Yeah, it's a lot in there. I think it comes back to my original point, which is that I think the norms have to change, and it's on the men to sort of step up now, right? I think the evidence is enough. There's enough evidence to show that women spend 10 times more time in unpaid care work. There's evidence to show, I mean, to add to this, in the hidden tax, there was also a recent study which showed that even in the workplace, even activities such as checking in on colleagues, making sure that their mental health is okay, this is also often disproportionately borne by women, because women are sort of seen as caregivers, and they take it on themselves to check in on colleagues, and other colleagues also then, they also a source of wind. So I think there are these dimensions of unpaid work, which includes not just the emotional labor, but also just care responsibilities of domestic chores and so on. And I think I just want to, I think sort of reiterating the point that it is really about kind of changing the conversation to bring men into it. You have this whole portrayal of women as the idea of Nari Shakti, which is of course commendable, but as goddesses and these amazing, powerful, they are powerful, but we are also extremely weak and vulnerable. And I think Shrayana's book really highlights that. And elevating women to this position of superhuman strength doesn't really work in our favor. It makes us then have to bear this double burden. And I think the narratives then also have to change. And you have also policy kind of exacerbating some of these notions. Policy also has a role to play in changing the norms. Let's provide smart kitchens for women. Great. Let's provide subsidized gas. Great. And, all of this will then remove the burden for women. But also let's talk about bringing men into the kitchen as well, getting them to do their dirty laundry and so on, right? So I think that's where, for me, it's really important. But I also just want to talk about really the pandemic impact, because that's something that we've been working very closely on. Because one of the things that, again, we found, and this relates to the care work question, was that, so of course, when the lockdown happened, you expect that, there's a loss of employment, but then you expect that, okay, things are going to go back to normal once the restrictions are eased. And what we find was that women were 7 times more likely than men to lose work, but they were 11 times more likely to not recover employment. Right? And now when we looked at why is it that women are not recovering employment, what we find is that, so you have things like education, having more experience in the labor market, all of these things kind of you expect them to hold you in good stead when you want to come back to work, right? So you think that older women who've worked longer, who are higher educated, have a benefit when they're trying to recover and re-enter the labor market. And this is the case for men. If you are more educated, if you're slightly older, you're able to re-enter. But when it comes to women, none of these so-called advantages really hold them in good stead. So there is this really a structural force at play that is keeping women out. And one of this is, of course, the structure of patriarchy. So we find that women who come from larger households, women who are married, these are women who are not able to recover. They are not able to come back. And interestingly, if you see our official employment estimates, which is the PLFS estimates, they actually show an increase in workforce participation for women. Okay. Now, is this a good thing? I would be skeptical about this, because what you see is what is the kind of work that women are coming back in. And there, what we find is that most of this work is in unpaid work. Now, unpaid work is not the work of care or of domestic chores. It's the work of taking part in your family farm or taking care of the shop, where you don't get a wage, but you contribute to the income of that shop or farm. Now, this is the kind of work that's increased for women. So to the extent that women have been able to come back, and WPR, workforce participation rate for women, has gone up, that's great. But then you need to also think about what is the kind of work that's gone up, right? So there's all of these different aspects on women being kept out because of these larger so-called responsibilities that they have. And then when they are able to participate, they always, especially now, participating at much lower wages, often at no wages at all, and really, worsening the already existing inequalities in the labor market.
Right. Thank you. Yamini ji, I'm coming to you next. So Rosa spoke about something very interesting, the systemic force keeping women out of the workforce. There's a phrase that we in the development sector like to use a lot, which is gender responsive budgeting, which is something Shrayana has spoken about in her interviews. A systemic reevaluation of how we understand the economy, how it is constructed, whether it is corresponding to the needs of women to enter, re-enter, and exist in the workforce. It may not correspond to linear parameters of how, let's say, men are required to, come in at a later stage in life. Would you say that policies and schemes aimed at addressing women's economic empowerment cannot be drafted using a straitjacket formula, but instead what we need in the context of policy framework and gender mainstreaming is to look at perhaps time as a limited time resource when divided equally or whichever way works between men and women will lead to women adequately occupying high paying jobs?
Thanks. I think, I'm not really convinced about gender responsive budgeting. Perhaps I simply just don't understand what it is and what it means. And that's an education that awaits me. But I think there's a larger issue at hand that's worth debating a little bit, which I often confront, and it makes me uncomfortable sometimes when we talk so much about women in the workplace, which is that I think this needs to be much more nuanced. It is crucial for the work environment to align itself in a way that enables women who need to and want to participate in the economy, able to participate in the economy on their own terms and in ways that work for them. But I also think by only emphasizing this, we undervalue the fundamental challenge of women employment, and a challenge that I confront in my as I have navigated this territory as a professional working parent myself, which is, what do we value as a society? And I think that we attach a significantly large amount of identity, esteem, and status to what we do in our professional life, and far less to what we do in our personal lives, particularly when it comes to bringing up the next generation. And in that undervaluing, we therefore emphasize the role that men play in the workplace, and de-emphasize the central role that a household as a unit plays, and I'm using my words very cautiously, a household that as a unit plays in actually building a next generation, building a cohesive society, all of which collectively contribute to productivity, economy, and growth. You will not have growth when you have a society that is torn by religious fragmentation, that is torn by violence, that is torn by many other forms of inequity and lack of solidarity. These have to be valued together. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of society do we value, and what kinds of actions of individuals and units in that society do we as a collectively as a society recognize and value effectively. Only then will we arrive at the world which Rosa rightly argues for, one in which men too have to take equal responsibility for both what happens within that household unit that contributes into the making of society, and the economic expression and freedom, as well as necessity that many of the women that Shrayana is talking about in her book too are craving for. These have to come together. And I find sometimes, I actually look at many young mothers who made active choices on their own terms to exit from the workforce in parts of time, feeling completely confident in their ability to do it. I toyed with the idea because it used to break my heart. Nobody told me anything, but every time I left my small babies at home, it would break my heart. I would come to work and cry for an hour and then get on with my life. Lots of men and women have gone through this, especially for us elite women or elite families, where actually we think of our working lives both as economically necessary, but also as a career where we seek a certain kind of affirmation. I never had the confidence to say I could give up on my professional aspirations for some time in order to look after my personal aspirations. Both are equally important to make me a whole person and to make me an effective contributor to society, including generating more productivity in society. So I think we need to have this conversation with a much more holistic perspective, and ask ourselves in forums like these where we're all agreeing on the broad framework. So let's now push ourselves a little bit to ask these questions, and see what we value as a society. Until we don't do that, we'll keep going round and round in circles.
Right. Thank you, Yaminiji. Varsha, I'm coming to you for closing comments now. And I'll ask you primarily something very interesting that Yaminiji pointed out, which is de-emphasizing the role. People de-emphasize the role of a household and the sort of vital importance that it has in collectively responding to our economic growth. Given that the principal problem of this discussion is that what ought to make women equal beneficiaries in the Indian economic growth story, and reading and paraphrasing from Shrayana's book, we can safely deduce and come to this conclusion that the battle for women's rights is primarily, or at least at the first juncture, fought inside homes. And economic empowerment is often used as a tool, as a sort of tool, medium that women use to leverage their chances with success. What would you say, since you rightly said you are the only person on this panel with a corporate experience, how would you respond to this?
I do agree with everything that Yamini said, but I also think that, we talk about bringing more women into the workforce, but we don't ask what men want, right? What if 50% of the men want to sit at home and become caregivers, right? Because caregiving is actually, the pillar on which everything else stands. And, exactly how Yamini articulated that, right? And I think that's a conversation we need to have, right? And I know enough number of men who want to drop out or take care of their families or, support their wives, post having a baby. And they are penalized, right? Or they're judged for staying at home and being stay-at-home dads, right? So I think we need to kind of emphasize conversations like that and make care something that is sexy for men too, right? And we need role modeling and education to kind of pad that, right? I mean, that's, and I don't know what can be done to kind of do that, but that's absolutely essential. Maybe role modeling classrooms, maybe role modeling on social media, maybe a different kind of, movie stars taking on these roles, more literature around this topic, celebrating men who kind of do chores at home. All of that could add value, I think.
Right, thank you. Dipali ji, I'm coming to you for closing comments. Varsha spoke about stay-at-home dads and the stigma attached to it. How do we make caregiving, I won't say sexy, but simply sort of attractive enough?
I can't hear.
Ma'am, can you hear me? Can everybody else hear me? Okay, Dipali ma'am, I'm going to come back to you. Can you hear me?
You're audible, Alia. We can
Okay, I'm going to come back to you, Dipali ma'am. I am coming to you, Professor Tarun Jain. I'm coming to you for closing comments on stay-at-home dads. I will not say how do we make caregiving sexy. I'll say how do we make it attractive enough to invest our time, resources, and energy in it. Would you agree with what Yamini ji said, what Varsha said? Removing the stigma attached to women working requires a transitional, multi-dimensional change in deep-rooted attitudes, in perhaps patriarchy, for the lack of a better word, that has developed and concretized over time?
This is a great question, Alia. And one of the straightforward points is that in Indian society, perhaps worldwide, power rests with men. And so if you want change men, right? And so, one of the, I think Shrayana references some of our work, working on gender attitudes in Haryana amongst young kids, both boys and girls. And we see that, girls and boys are all both equally adept to changing their minds, but when it comes to changing their actions, boys just have far more agency to be able to do that, right? So when I think about like, who's going to benefit from having better attitudes, it's most probably going to be the wives of these boys when they grow up, right? So much more progressive men will mean that their wives just have, much more degrees of freedom. And so this is the critical part. I'm quite hopeful that India's new generation, young people will be far more progressive. Maybe, this is maybe it's a hope that I have, that they'll be far more progressive. Maybe the positive role models that they see on TV, on social media, on all these different, on Bollywood, would be just like Shahrukh Khan was, right, for a generation. A positive motivation for men as well. And therefore, what you'll see is that the combination of men having better views will also lead to women having more agency, simply because the fact remains that men have the controlling levers. And so insofar that men still need to be on board with women going out to work, women studying more, women exercising their choices, I think that's going to be pretty important. Now, let me come back to your point about men staying at home. You're absolutely right? So that men want to be off this thing that they have to be the primary breadwinners, and that their identity sits with the fact that they are going to be providing the major paycheck. I think there was this point that Varsha made earlier about women in their 30s who think about stepping back because their husbands got enough of a salary or enough of earnings. It need not be. And I think it's quite important to emphasize that specific, it's fine to want to step back for men and women when their household incomes reach a certain point. There's no reason to think that, look, the objective of life is to maximize the joint household income. It's fine for someone to want to step back. It's okay to, maybe men would want to step back. Maybe it's both of them. And we should think of creative ways to propagate that idea in society. Maybe a new Shahrukh Khan movie.
Right. Thank you, Tarun. I'm coming to you, Rosa, for closing comments. I spoke to you a few days and you said that while you don't understand a lot of, but you haven't understand a lot of what Shahrukh Khan says in Hindi, if I'm not wrong, you still feel a sort of link to Shahrukh Khan, and I would really appreciate it. So would Sameerji, if we could sort of come full circle to Shahrukh Khan while we are talking about the fact that women are largely concentrated in traditionally low income, unorganized jobs. So how would you say that with Shahrukh Khan as this symbol of the promise of post-liberalization India, who is a symbol of autonomy, purchasing power, social capital, so on and so forth, somebody who actively engages in household work, who isn't afraid to share the load or engages deeply with the needs of women, be it emotionally or simply just unpaid care work, how would you make a link between the two factors, unpaid care work and Shahrukh Khan, for our readers, and sort of also building on what Tarun said?
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot of this discussion reminded me of this paper, which was written in the South Korean context. And the paper was titled, "I want to, but I won't." And now this paper was about men's use of paternal leave. So in South Korea, the men have access to 1 year's paternity leave, but only 6% of men actually took paternity leave. And the reason that they said was because they felt that others would judge them negatively and they would suffer, not in terms of monetary suffering, but just in terms of how people perceive them, right? So even for men, there are these insecurities around displaying their vulnerabilities and their desire to care and the desire to engage in what has been the domain of women's work. And then it brings me to how, for me, Shahrukh Khan captures this, because I think in one of his interviews, and I think Shrayana also quotes him as saying that, "I think I have a lot of woman in me." And the power of a statement like that, for a celebrity of his stature to make a statement like that, shows his, it's not a weakness. It's not a weakness, and it's something that he's open to saying. And it's okay to demonstrate that all of us have these spectrums of masculinity and femininity. Even as women, sometimes we also feel that, we tend towards the more masculine side in some things, right? And for a man to outright say and be okay with his vulnerabilities and be okay with that feminine side, I think that goes one way in sort of the role model that Varsha, Tarun, and so on have been talking about. And I think, so for me, not having watched a lot of Shah Rukh Khan movies, I think a lot of women in China's book talk about this, that it was his interviews and how he communicated that really appealed to them. And also for me, just how he interacts with his wife, it was just complete unabashed love, and there was no hesitation in showing that love, and there was no holding back of intimacy, also respecting her as an individual. And all of these are, I think all of us want that. And it's just become more and more difficult to actually demonstrate these in a public space. And I think he really gives that and brings together solidarity for women in having a man like that they can identify with, right? So I think for me, it was also not just bringing this vulnerabilities into a public space, but also him as a thread to bring women together. And I think for me, the most enduring part of this book was a scene where women got together, they borrowed or rented a VCD to watch a movie screening. And I think that was just, for me, just captured the essence of this man and what he means for women across the country.
Right. Thank you, Rosa. Shrayana, as much as I would like to be the one asking you for closing comments, we have run out of time and I'm going to open the floor. We have lots of questions. The first question is for you. Economic liberalization post-91 opened up multiple opportunities for men and women across India. However, female labor participation in India fell to 16% after the pandemic hit. How do you see this fall in labor participation in terms of socio-economic well-being of women?
Alia, I have an entire, as you know, there's large chunks of the book where I get into almost 30 years of data and theories on what has happened. I want to summarize by saying two quick things. One is the economy liberalized for men. Jobs have been accrued by men. Freedoms, and it's not just, I don't just mean it as like the pure material gains, but in the book you see this, right? There were highways that were built and then boys could use those highways to go to malls and just have fun, visit places, have adventures, migrate. The way jobs have also been created post-liberalization, there's tremendous clustering of job opportunities, and women still struggle to migrate without marriage. In fact, marriage is the main reason why women migrate. Migration for job opportunities is very difficult for women. Finding housing, I think many of the issues that Dipali ji also mentioned. Now, when we look at this drop in labor force participation, we should be a bit nuanced, because one of the things that's also happening, and I think this goes back to the point that Yamini was making, is that, of course, the economy has grown in such a way that there are certain sectors that have grown which tend to hire more men than women, be it construction, retail, transport, storage. However, at the same time, there are also economists who say that as incomes have grown, some women have chosen to withdraw from the labor force to focus much more on full-time caregiving, or women are sort of seen as flexible resources within the household, right? Lots of feminist economists teach us this. Now, in the book, as you can see, there's sort of both sides to that. There are women in my book who are very unhappy that they have withdrawn, but they've realized that their proficiency at mothering and caring is just far higher than the skill men bring to caregiving. So they realize this is the more sensible decision for the household to make. There are other women who are quite happy, actually, because they will say that the office environment or even the workspaces, and this is particularly true for upper middle class elite women, they will say the office environment is so full of bro codes and it's so aggressive that it's actually quite nice to not be dealing with that, right? And then we can read it whichever way we want. But it is a choice that many women are making, and it's called the income effect, which is actually, you see, and there's data in the book that shows, in fact, in the richest cohort of India, upper caste, close to about 6.5% of mothers are working. So this gives you a sense of, part of it is also withdrawal and part of it is also just the burden of caregiving. I want to actually just come back to this one thing about liberalization, and I think this relates to the decline in workforce participation rates, is that, behind that decline, there are also those who say, well, women are studying more, so that's perhaps a good aspect of what's going on. But the one thing that just has not changed with liberalization or even, any of the growth that we've seen is that the story of liberalization and the story of growth has largely been told by men from a very masculine perspective of the economy. In fact, in the book, one of the things I was very keen on doing is bringing the female gaze to liberalization, because, if you think about the big books that have been written about liberalization or the heroes of liberalization, they have been men. And Part of it is by just design, part of it is just the gaze. And I think acknowledging the home as a very important fulcrum of the economy, we're yet to see. We pay a lot of lip service to it. We're stuck in this equilibrium of platitudes and lip service. I don't see very many credible investments moving in that direction. And I think part of that is also the reason why we see this sharp decline. But at the same time, it's not like women are not working. Women are working, we're just not valuing that work.
Right. Thanks, Shrayana. Dipali ji, the next question is to you. What is the extent to which social norms dictate the participation of women in the economy? Okay, I suddenly can't see Dipali ji. Rohan, is she still here?
Facing some technical difficulties, I think.
Right. Yamini ji, the next question is for you. Do you believe that the Indian financial market is insensitive towards caste-based gender disparities? If yes, what would be the mechanism to overcome this?
Gosh, I'm really not the best person to answer that question. I don't know. I haven't dabbled very effectively with the sophisticated financial market, but yes, broadly, the Indian market, the Indian economy is certainly stacked up against women, and I think in more ways than one, Shrayana's book has put a mirror to this, and identified many of the causes and also many of the multiple mutinies that are taking place in our everyday lives to prise open more spaces for women, both in the home and in the economy.
Right.
Can I just add to what?
Of course.
Right. So, I mean, I think a lot of our discussion is focused on employment markets, right? So where it's women's work, but there are all sorts of ways in which there's discrimination. So Shrayana talks about the housing market, which is, if you're a woman and try to rent versus a man trying to rent. You can think about consumer markets, right? Women are supposed to pay pink tax is, I think, the term that is used, where you pay the same more money for the same product, right? Because you're a woman. You can think about, financial markets. You can think about credit markets. So Dipali ji has worked a lot on credit markets. So, this is an economy-wide issue. And I think what your questioner is asking is specifically about investment markets. But it's important to emphasize that there are various aspects of the business world, right, which have this gender discrimination problem and have the corresponding issue of, ways in which to overcome it. And, I think that the business world is not quite focused on that yet. And lots of work still needs to be done.
Thank you, Tarun. Dipali ji, coming to you finally, I will repeat the question. What is the extent to which social norms dictate the participation of women in the economy?
See, there are informal markets where women transact, but women have to be moved from the margins to the mainstream as both as producers and consumers of goods and services. And ultimately, you wanted to close with why SRK, and I want to go to the last paragraph of the book, where she says that it's in real life, there are inherent struggles and discrimination, which creates an air of isolation. A film star makes the loneliness bearable. He offers a glimmer of a possibility, a different way of relating to humans. His iconography offers us metaphors, a new language, a way to express radical expectations of reciprocity and care for families and men. And women across the spectrum whom she's interviewed are united in this desire. And I love the way she says, you may not even like Shahrukh Khan very much, but as our economy and democracy contract, there is a lot of struggle for women who desire autonomy and achievement. And we will need our shared future will need icons who unite us in conversation and connection rather than those who divide us into spiritual silos. So I think I'd like to close with that.
Right, right. Because we have 10 more minutes, there's a very interesting question that I'd like to come to both Rosa and Professor Tarun. At 14% GDP, the economic contribution of Indian women is less than half if compared to China at 40%. The viewer cites World Bank data. What can be the critical policy interventions to close this gap? I'll come to you first, Rosa.
Okay, so first point is that this is a gross underestimate simply because women's work is not valued. So the moment you ask the right questions and measure the right things, you'll find that it's much, much more, right? Women, and I think there's work by Ashwini Deshpande and Kabir where they just simply asking, well, do you engage in making jaggery at home and then is it sold? Yes, there is. And there is a huge bump up in women doing work or employment, as you call it, right? So on the one hand, of course, there is a clear underestimation of women's contribution to GDP and the economy. In terms of specific policies, now, if you recognize that, but there is still capacity to have more women's participation, then what are the policy measures that can come into play? I think just immediately in a very pandemic context, I would say keep schools open. Please keep schools open. I mean, we cannot afford to close our schools when malls, gyms, and everything else is up and running. But also, I think, again, in a pandemic context, there's evidence that, and that there is norms that when work is in short supply, there is preference that jobs should be rationed out for men. That's always the case, right? And so there is need for specifically having rationing out of jobs for women. So NREGA is typically a workfare program that women actively engage in. I mean, most of NREGA beneficiaries, more than half of them are women. And as the employment crisis develops in the country, these are things that women are going to be rationed out of. So there is it's important to sort of specifically carve out employment spaces for women, both in terms of wage work, things like wage subsidies to encourage salaried work, right? These are also ways in which you can bring in women back into the workforce. But also, I think there is a lot of importance given to self-employment, and these are great. This is ways for women to sort of work from home, but also something to keep in mind when you talk about self-employment. This is also a kind of work where women have to engage in not just the labor market. They have to engage with an input market. They have to engage with the credit market. They have to engage with the digital infrastructure. And these are all markets and spaces which are again gendered. Women don't have access to mobile phones. Credit markets are biased against women. Input markets, women have far less bargaining power. So if you're sort of promoting self-employment for women, you also need to build up infrastructure in these other markets that can also facilitate women's self-employed activities, right? So I think there's a whole gamut of policy arrangement that need to go into play. More importantly, there is also need to build up care infrastructure. So there is a lot of spending on infrastructure, and one of this infrastructure has to be care and public services. It has to be in health, it has to be in schools, it has to be in our education sector, not just because these are important as a public service, but these are also ways in which women can then engage with the economy because their children are being cared for. And they are also employers of women, traditional employers of women. So I think there's a lot that can be done. Only some of it is done, and most of it is not.
Right. Thank you, Rosa. Tarun, would you like to come in for a very quick comment?
Yeah, sure. Rosa has already said everything important, so I have nothing more to add.
Okay, perfect. And with that, we have answered all of our questions. Thank you very much. I hand over to Rohan to give the quick vote of thanks.
Thank you very much for taking time out in this evening and discussing Shrayana's excellent book. It was such a pleasure to listen to everything that everyone had to say. And many congratulations, Shrayana, once again on having written what I think is a fantastic, fantastic book.